All right, I'm super excited about this segment today. We're going to talk about employer stock and equity compensation plans. So this is something that really we never used to see, but coming out of COVID, we have a lot more people working remote and they're working for larger companies. A lot of these companies have had IPOs where they're now publicly traded, and a big part of compensation for a lot of these employers is stock for that employer. Now, this may not apply to you, but it may apply to your kids, your grandkids, or other family members. So pay attention, and if they're in a situation where they work for a publicly traded company, this is probably going to be something that's relevant to them. So what are equity compensation plans? Well, there's a few different types. There's RSUs, or restricted stock units. There's your traditional stock options plans, and then there's these ESPP, employer stock purchase plans. Okay, so all of these work a little bit different. All of them, though, have tax consequences that we want to be aware of. But the main thing is employers a lot of times now, when they get to bonus time, instead of giving cash rewards to individuals, they're giving them shares of that company, which is great because you get to benefit in that company's success. However, if that company isn't doing very well, you also don't benefit from that company's success. So I'm gonna use my wife as an example. She works for a tech company out of California. Every year she gets a large stock award, which that might sound great. Well, if I pulled up the performance chart of her company, you'd notice it's been going straight down. So it's great that we get these awards. However, when they're a large percentage of our compensation plan and that stock isn't doing well, that's not really helping us out financially. So I recently met with an individual, went into retirement, have a large sum of money all in their employer stock. Now, again, they're benefiting from the success of that employer, but if that company doesn't do well, you have so much concentration risk there. What we want to be thinking about is proactively maybe starting to de-risk that portfolio, not necessarily going to cash, but diversifying away from just that one company. Now you might say, okay, that company is a phenomenal company. We want to maintain ownership. That's okay, but what we want to think about is maybe leveraging that for other income pieces. Okay? And when we're looking at RSUs, these stock options, or these stock purchase plans, where they all have these different pros and cons, or maybe we're buying stock at a discount, we want to avoid is being too concentrated. So what we want to sit back is think to ourselves, all right, do I really want 70+% of my liquid net worth in one stock? Probably not. That'd be very risky. So we want to be thinking about how can we proactively then start to de-risk this portfolio, add a little bit more diversification, but of course we have to kind of overlay that with taxes. So this is where we kind of take a pause. So if we're using RSUs, if we're using stock purchase plan, if we're looking at stock options, all of these work a little bit different tax-wise, and we need to be careful in how we're using them. Okay? When we're looking at these different pieces of the portfolio, they're going to have consequences. So if we're looking at them inside of our 401k versus if it's in an after-tax brokerage account, we want to be careful on how we're exercising these options. We want to be careful on our vesting schedule and how we're selling those RSUs, or our holding period requirement for these stocks that we purchase at a discount. All of them have a little bit different rules associated with them. And we want to be careful when we're analyzing that equity compensation plan, if we're going with the idea of de-risking it and getting a little bit more diversification, that we're doing it more proactively tax-wise. So when we're looking at equity compensation plans, this is something that's continuing to grow, and we're seeing it become large percentages of clients' liquid net worths. A lot of people coming to our dinner events, we've seen large positions in their different employer stock plans. And what we want to be thinking about is, well, what can we do today not only to just diversify the portfolio, but as we diversify that portfolio, how does it impact our tax return? Okay, that's why we want to have a team. Okay, in Centennial Wealth, we have a team, we have a tax team, we have the advisory team. I specialize in working with a lot of our clients on these different equity compensation plans. I encourage you to reach out to us. Even if you're 20 or 30 years old and this is just starting to build up in your portfolio, the decisions we make today are going to impact our retirement. I know that sounds corny if it's maybe 30 years down the road. This is why it's important maybe for your kids or your grandkids. What we do today can have a massive impact long-term in how we position ourselves with these different equity compensation pieces. So the planning around those really starts today. We want to be thinking proactively, how do we position ourselves? How do we get the most diversified portfolio, but also do it in the most tax efficient way? So I encourage you, please reach out to us if this is something that you or a family member has in their plan. We want to be thinking about, again, how we can use this and leverage it best of our ability.